What are you going to do about this? Oh, we can't. That was the planning commission that did that. We went to the planning commission. They said, oh, we're not responsible for it. We just got the money for it. That's the local representative. Everybody passes the buck. The more government you have, the more power it has, the easier it is to hide behind it. This is a major danger of regional government. Your elected officials, whom you elect to represent you, shrug their shoulders and say, gee, I can't help you. You need to talk to the regional planners. They simply don't care what you think. It's interesting to note that the UN Commission on Global Governance said this, quote, regionalism must precede globalism. We foresee a seamless system of governance from local communities, individual states, regional unions, and up through the United Nations itself, end quote. In Dade County, Florida, 1,500 people are losing their homes due to land use regulations. In King County, Washington, 17,000 residents have petitioned their local government to change land use policies that will result in a loss of 65% of their property. And as you all know, in Fauquier County, Virginia, Martha Bonetta is facing multiple fines of $5,000 a day on her small farm store that was closed down, all for holding a children's birthday party on her own land without the proper permit. This is the same thing as you having to get a permit to have a Super Bowl party. And most recently, you probably know, Martha's suffering from an IRS audit, all driven by the most evil conservation group I have ever encountered as I've traveled the country, the Piedmont Environmental Council, which runs our county, probably runs your county. They have harassed her. They've worked hand in hand with county government that they control, all because she refuses to knuckle under to their attempts to control her land. These are not the actions of a free society. Americans were granted a right through the Fourth Amendment, actually not granted it, because they had the right. But the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, was to secure their right to be secure in their homes. This is raw government power unchecked and growing out of control. Even if you believe that there needs to be changes in our society to protect the environment, surely any honest American would admit that such actions by government are out of line. And that's why I and thousands of other Americans are now so concerned. So why are these things happening in America? Is it connected or just a random situation? Well, the standard points made by those who promote these policies of sustainable development and its planning process are these. This is what they say. Local planning is a local idea. Agenda 21 is a non-binding resolution, they tell us, not a treaty. So it carries no legal authority from which any nation is bound to act. It has no teeth, they say over and over and over again. And they, of course, right behind that assure us that the UN has no enforcement capability. Planners are simply honest professionals trying to do their job, and all these protests are wasting their valuable time. Shame on you. The main concern, they tell us, of Agenda 21 is that man is fouling the environment and using up resources for future generations, and we just need a sensible plan to preserve and protect the earth. What's so bad about that? The American Planning Association now says over and over and over again, there is no hidden agenda. Now, why do they feel the need to say that? Could it be because there's a hidden agenda? I've read, I love this one. Walk up to some of the folks outside the doors who don't believe you, and they'll say, I've read Agenda 21, and I can find no threatening language that says it's a global plot. What are you so afraid of? How many documents do you think come out of the UN that says, warning, this is a global plot? They write it in language that sounds so simple that Dr. Seuss should have read it. And of course, the most often heard response, Agenda 21? What's that? The fact is, Agenda 21 is an international policy that does not recognize America's unique form of government that was designed to protect individuals from government power. It has no place in American society. Agenda 21 is a general plan designed to reorganize human society using the excuse of environmental protection to control our economy, our individual choices, our natural resources, and even the structure of our families. In short, every aspect of our lives. The fact is, Agenda 21 is what they call a comprehensive blueprint to literally change human society. And each of these incidents I've just described, and thousands more like them, are a coordinated effort to bring that about. Whenever I or my associates talk about Agenda 21 as it pertains to U.S. or state and local law, we are accused of perpetrating a conspiracy theory that the UN is taking over our country. Our opponents are quick to point out that the UN has no enforcement capability and that there are no UN officials overseeing our city council chambers or no blue-helmeted troops marching in our streets. Well, that's true. The fact is, Agenda 21 is making its way into American policy in a much more subtle, difficult-to-follow path. Let me try to explain. The term sustainable development was born on the pages of the United Nations document called Our Common Future, the official report of the 1987 UN World Commission on Environment and Development. As a result of this report, for the first time, the use of environmental protection and human development were tied to the age-old sustainability goals of international redistribution of wealth. And that is the key to understanding the true purpose of sustainable development and all of its policies, control of all facets of the economy. They blame U.S. free markets for all the ills of poor nations. They say we consume too much. They say we live well at the expense of the environment and the expense of the poor. And so they intend to diminish our way of life, to harmonize us into the rest of the world. Here is how the United Nations described Agenda 21 in one of its own publications in 1993 in an article entitled Agenda 21, the Earth Summit Strategy to Save the Planet. Quote, Agenda 21 proposes an array of actions which are intended to be implemented by every person on Earth. It calls for specific changes in the activities of all people. Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all humans unlike anything the world has ever experienced. End quote. Does that sound like a document you want to have as your government? Who decides? And here is the exact course that brought Agenda 21 to America and into our local communities. The infrastructure pushing the Sustainable Development Agenda is a vast international matrix. At the top of the heap is the United Nations Environmental Program, or the UNEP. But the UNEP does not operate on its own. Influencing it are thousands of non-governmental organizations, NGOs. These are private groups which seek to implement a specific political agenda. Through the UN structure, particularly through the UNEP, they have great power. And I should point out that true NGOs, it's not just any organization. They are groups officially sanctioned and certified by the UN to participate in these international efforts. They become equal partners with government representatives. Prior to the 1992 UN Earth Summit in Rio, these sanctioned NGO groups spent considerable time writing and creating the document that would be introduced to the world as Agenda 21. At the Earth Summit, 179 heads of state signed agreement to follow Agenda 21, including George H.W. Bush. It is true, Agenda 21 is not a treaty that has to be ratified by the Senate. Rather, it's what's known as a soft law policy, a guideline that the nation agrees to implement through its own legislative process. President Bush in signing the document, committed the U.S. to implement the policies of Agenda 21. That sent the policy into our federal bureaucracy, which started to set it in motion. Agenda 21 then gained huge momentum when in 1993, President Clinton issued an executive order to create the President's Council on Sustainable Development and made it official U.S. policy. The only purpose of the President's Council was to bring Agenda 21 into American policy. Serving on that council were many of the same NGOs which helped write Agenda 21 at the UN. All players in the creation of Agenda 21 now openly serving on the President's Council with a specific mission of implementing Agenda 21 into American policy. Meanwhile, back at the UN, included at the UNEP table to develop the policy, along with all the NGO groups who helped write it, are these players. An incredible mix of agencies of the federal government of the United States of America. These include the Department of State, the Department of Interior, the Department of Agriculture, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. These agencies send representatives to all UNEP meetings. Now, why do they do that if Agenda 21 is just a myth that has no effect on our government? Good parties? They get to go out to lunch together?
Yes.
Probably do all that too. The purpose of the President's Council was to translate the guidelines of Agenda 21 into public policy to be administered by the federal government. And that step-by-step process translated into the ruling authority through which a UN plan, Agenda 21, has become unquestioned U.S. policy throughout the nation. It was invented by NGOs through the UN. It was brought to the U.S. through the President's Council, and through federal and state legislation is being implemented at the local level through the involvement of the same NGO groups who helped write it in the first place. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Sustainable development is not a local idea or a local policy. So what is sustainable development? Sustainable development is about a planned central economy and redistribution of wealth on a local, state, national, and international level. The process by which it is implemented creates a matrix of locked-away land, of severe land use controls, control of energy and energy production, control of transportation, control of industry, control of food production, control of development, control of water availability, and control of population size and growth. Most of their policies and regulations are issued under the excuse of protecting the environment. The real purpose is to transform human society and control its every action. This is the process through which America is being transformed. It is what state and local laws are really implementing using terms like comprehensive development plans, energy audits, open space, and historic preservation. This is Agenda 21 and sustainable development. Agenda 21 is not just policy. It is a complete system to change the way we think, the way we react, the way we make decisions, and those who promote it have very specific answers as to how they want you to do each of those things. That is why they call it an agenda. There are 4 very specific routes being used to bring it to this country. In the rural areas, it's called the Wildlands Project. In the cities, it's called Smart Growth. In business, it's called Public-Private Partnerships. And in government, it's called Stakeholder Councils and Non-Elected Boards. And regional government, or as they said in the Clinton administration, reinvented government. Take them one at a time. The Wildlands Project was the brainchild of Earth First Dave Foreman. Earth First, one of the most violent environmental activist groups this nation ever had. Dave Foreman is literally demented, in my opinion. It literally calls for the rewilding, as I said earlier, of 50% of all the land in every state, back to the way it was before Christopher Columbus had set foot on this land. Thomas Lovejoy, a science advisor to the Federal Department of Interior, said, quote, "We will map the nation, determine development for the whole country, and regulate it." How do you remove people from the land? There are many tools in place to stop human activity and grow the wilderness. Deny grazing and water rights on public lands. That was at the root of the Clive Bundy standoff with the BLM. Denying grazing and water rights. Lock away natural resources by creating more national parks. Label specific lands to be wetlands with no development allowed. Right now, the EPA is moving on something we've predicted for several years. Now they're moving on it. They're moving on a plan to designate mud puddles, or maybe even water under the surface, as navigatable waterways of the United States to be ruled and regulated by the EPA. They use the Endangered Species Act as a major weapon to kill the forest industry and shut down the mills and kill jobs and destroy entire towns. What do you do after all that happens in your town? You leave. And where do you go? What's left for you? You go into the cities. You see how it works? The state of Maryland, I say here is considering, but I think we've gone beyond that, a plan to ban septic tanks as a means to protect the Chesapeake Bay, even though there is no evidence that septic tanks do any damage whatsoever. The only result of the ban will be to make it impossible to live in a rural area, unless you want to spend several $1 million on your own private water treatment plant that they have to approve, by the way. The Wildlands Project comes in many names and many programs. Wilderness areas, comprehensive land use plans, bikeways, greenways, heritage areas, land management, rails and trails, open space, wolf and bear reintroduction, conservation easements, and many more. Each of these programs is designated to make it just a little harder to live on the land, a little more expensive, a little more hopeless. In reality, the process is simply herding people off the rural land into human habitat areas or the cities. And of course, when we say this, this is where they start giving us a tinfoil hat and say this is a conspiracy theory. Watch the program. Watch what happens. What is the result of those programs when they do it? How long can you stay on your property? How long can you fight? How long can you be a Martha Bonetta when they have the entire power of government coming after you? What's the result? You get out of the way. How do you get out of the way? Go where they want you to go. The second path to sustainable development is called smart growth. They put a line around the city, and they tell you no growth can take place outside of that line. Urban sprawl, they say disdainfully. Actually, the real problem is government sprawl. Evil sprawl. Those areas of community growth where people run to escape the megacities. That's what they are. In nearly every case, these new homes and these shiny developments are a place where a family first opened the door with smiles on their faces because this was their home. They have backyards for the kids to play in. They have a real sense of community. And of course, then what happens when you have that awful sprawl like that? Those terrible strip malls that spring up around the new developments that supply goods and services for these new residents. It's also called jobs that enhance the economy. Stack and packed cities are not livable if you actually believe in fresh air and a place for the kids to play. Cities are full of government and drugs and disease and inefficient use of energy and resources. Do the sustainabilists focus on stopping murders by drug cartels or beatings by gangs of illegal aliens? I'm not allowed to say that. You never seem to hear anything about any of that in their plans. You know,